Hi students, welcome. Jameson here. Happy to invite you to Chapter 9 of our environmental science textbook. In this chapter, we're studying land, how it shapes us, how we shape it, and the human-earth interaction of what's right here beneath our feet. So what are we getting into? We're looking at the processes shaping Earth's surface and how they influence our lives. We get to dive into geology, looking at Earth's internal structure, the constantly changing surface, the recycling of the surface. We'll talk about rocks and minerals and how those contribute to soil formation. We'll look at soil characteristics, soil organisms, the health of the world's soil, and we will tie it all together thinking about how human intervention, human activities degrade the soil and restore the soil. Let's get into it. We know more about the movement of celestial bodies than about the soil underfoot. Leonardo da Vinci. Well, when he said that, we really didn't know much about soil. We didn't understand that mycorrhizae could fix nitrogen and provide that nutrient essential for plant growth and plant health to them. We know a lot more now about what's going on. And what we know now is that topsoil and beach erosion are some of the gradual changes to Earth's surface. We know that climate change is resulting in sea level rise, accelerating beach erosion, and we know that large events can have catastrophic impacts. And in the case of the Tohoku earthquake in 2011, a tsunami was created that basically stripped so much of the surrounding land around, and it ended in catastrophe, disaster. It killed needless amounts of people. Unfortunately, may they rest in peace. And this is because the earth is dynamic. It is a dynamic process where plates sit on top of the surface, tectonic plates. Those tectonic plates are shifting. And when there's movement between two tectonic plates, seismic waves occur, and we feel those as earthquakes. Now, earthquakes are really important because we understand the structure of the earth from them. The study of seismology, interpreting and reading waves through the earth, seismic waves, has allowed us to gain a subsurface understanding of how our world works. I'll save us. I'll try not to talk too much about geology. I think it's awesome, and it's really, really cool. We didn't know what was in the earth for a long time. The theory of plate tectonics came about in the 1960s. Before that, we thought that continents were stable. They didn't move. They just stayed in one place. But now we know that according to the theory of plate tectonics, the Earth's surface is composed of multiple large plates that move relative to one another, shifting the locations of ocean basins and continents through time, through Earth's surface. The deepest hole was dug in 1994, the Kola Super Deep Borehole, 10,000 feet deeper than Everest to about 7.5 miles, but it was still about 3,700 miles away from Earth's center. So this was trying to get an idea of what the heck is down there? What's underneath our feet? This has been a question that scientists have been asking for a long time. What's in outer space? What's underneath of our feet? What's in this glass of water? The nature of scientific inquiry is to understand the natural world around us, and understanding land is part of it. So using earthquakes and seismic waves, we now know that the earth has 3 layers. The outer layer is the crust, inside of that is the mantle, and inside is the core. And it's shaped kind of like an egg. If you think about the crust is kind of like the shell, the mantle would be the egg white, and then the yolk would be the core of a hard-boiled egg, that is. It's not all runny. The core is primarily iron and nickel. Lots of iron, a little bit of nickel. solid inner core, liquid outer core, and there are currents, movement of the iron and nickel in that liquid outer core, and it creates a dipole or a magnet, which creates a magnetic field for our entire planet. How cool is that? Our Earth is a giant magnet. That's why when you have a compass, it points to north, because the compass needle is magnetic and it is aligning with Earth's magnetic field, because we have a huge magnet at the center of our Earth, essentially. There is the magnetosphere from the magnetic field, which basically moves charged particles away from the equator and towards the poles, and it gives us what's called the northern lights and the southern lights. It's a really cool phenomenon where you can see a scattering of some of the sun's rays at these poles, producing a very, very brilliant luminosity of a color. Basically, Earth's magnetic field in action. We see it in lots of different ways. Certain organisms migrate according to Earth's magnetic fields. We have magnetite crystals inside of our brain that help us to orient towards north and south. That's why some of us have an amazing sense of direction. We're actually connected into the Earth's magnetic field. How cool is that? Super cool stuff. Geology 101. The crust is rigid. It is composed of oceanic crust and continental crust. The upper layer of the mantle composes lithosphere and asthenosphere. Tectonic plates are large pieces of lithosphere that lie atop asthenosphere. And the asthenosphere flows, albeit very, very slowly, and the lithosphere is rigid and it breaks. That's why tectonic plates break and move relative to one another, and then they flow on top of the ductile or plastic asthenosphere. Butterflies are one of the specific organisms that tunes into Earth's magnetic field to migrate from Canada to the United States, Mexico, and back every spring and summer. It is the great monarch butterfly migration, which is beautiful if you've ever seen it. And we've mentioned this before, but the number one reason why we're losing different species is habitat loss. These butterflies need trees to nest in along the way. When all these trees get cut down, there's nowhere for them to nest. And if they don't have trees to land on their migration routes, well, then it decimates the population. Everything is connected. And in order to conserve biodiversity, we need to protect habitats. We need to protect the land in its natural shape, in its natural regime, in its natural ecosystem, for all the species that have adapted to survive on it to continue to survive. So leaving land the way that it is hugely important. There is enough land to go around that we do not need to change every single bit of it. In fact, if we do, it is only going to be to our demise, because it will take away the homes of all the different species that we need in order to survive. This is a crazy idea that continents move. What? Continents move? I'm standing on a continent right now. It's not going anywhere. Alfred Wegener in 1915 was the first person to propose this idea. He called it Continental Drift, and it was based on 4 lines of evidence. He looked at the continents and said, they look like they fit together, like puzzle pieces. Oh, okay, yeah, actually, you're right, they do. He looked at fossils and saw that similar fossils lived on Australia, or were found on Australia, South America, in Africa. Also, similar fossils were found on North America and Northern Europe. which were fossils of plants and animals that couldn't have crossed oceans. So similar fossil types. He looked at mountain ranges. The Appalachian Mountains and the North Caledonia Mountains in Europe and even in some in Iceland are the same rocks. And a basic understanding of geology is that in order for rocks to be the same, they've got to be laid down and they've got to be developed at the same place. But here we see the same exact rocks on opposite sides of the oceans. And then evidence of glaciers covering the Indian the Indian subcontinent, South America, Africa, and Australia, and then coal swamps from temperate in places that wouldn't develop coal swamps. So climatic patterns. So Wegener came out, sorry about that. Wegener came out and said, the planets look like they fit together, the continents look like they fit together like puzzle pieces. There is similar fossils on opposite continents. There's mountains on opposite continents, and there's glacial evidence spanning lots of different continents. Well, all these continents must have been together, forming a supercontinent that he called Pangea, and he was right. But he didn't have a mechanism. Scientists said, okay, Mr. Alfred Wegener, well, how the heck do you explain that happened? And he didn't have an idea for the mechanism. He said, well, maybe it was tidal forces, but according to physics, tidal forces wouldn't have the power to move continents any distance. So he really didn't know. And unfortunately, he didn't live to see the day that his idea was universally accepted into the theory of plate tectonics. So here we can see Pangea about 500 to 200 million years ago. It really started to break up around 300 million years ago, and then it was a shifting of the continents over time to their present location. And they shifted due to multiple tectonic plates of the Earth's lithosphere moving relative to one another because of the process of seafloor spreading, which was discovered by Harry Hess in the 1940s and the 1950s. And basically, these discoveries led to the understanding that tectonic plates move and they have boundaries. Divergent plate boundaries, where new ocean crust is created. Convergent boundaries, where one plate subducts below another plate. And transform plate boundaries, where a plate moves laterally next to another one. The San Andreas Fault is a textbook example. And in fact, the San Andreas Fault is in every textbook that you will see discussing transform plate boundaries because it is so easily viewed from the surface. And you can see this straight line right here. You can think about the Pacific plate moving in this direction relative to the North American plate moving in this direction. And in California, when we have large earthquakes, it's because of the movement of these large faults, the San Andreas Fault, and then associated faults with it. So this leads us to the rock cycle. There are three types of rocks: igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphic. And all rocks on Earth are in a constant state of change. It just happens very, very slow. The Earth has been around for 4.5 billion years, a very long time. It's given lots of time for things to happen and to move around. We could think about magma from the Earth solidifying, making its way to the surface, and becoming igneous rock. This rock is subdued to weathering and erosion and is deposited in basins that lithifies into sedimentary rock. That sedimentary rock or igneous rock can be exposed to pressures and temperatures that change the chemical composition of the existing rock without melting it, forming a metamorphic rock. And the pathways to and from and in between are very, very complex, and they can shift over time. So erosion and lithification. This is basically the breaking down of large rocks into smaller pieces called sediments. Those sediments can be eroded by wind, water, or glaciers, and they make their way to a place where they can be deposited, usually in ocean basins. Over time, the weight of the overlying material forces water out, and it causes compaction and cementation. This lithifies to turn into rock. This lithifies the sediment into a whole new type of rock called a sedimentary rock. We talked about this. I kind of got really excited and talked about the next few slides. But sediment builds and it accumulates, and sediment is a product of erosion. Here we can see the Grand Canyon, which has eroded a lot of sediment. And we can see stratigraphic layers all the way down to the basement rock, the Vishnu schist in the bottom, almost 2 billion years old. So the rocks that are exposed, the Grand Canyon is awesome. It is like a history book of the earth. Sedimentary layers in general are history books containing evidence for past climates, past biology, for things that happened, earth events that happened in its history. Metamorphism is going to be where one rock changes to another, producing metamorphic rock. I think I've summarized the rock cycle pretty well. Rocks are made of minerals. Minerals are important for a variety of uses. You've probably heard of the term minerals. Get this, for your essential vitamins and minerals. And yes, it's true that we are made of organic compounds and we need minerals and various elements for healthy functioning. But there's also minerals that we use in everyday products. There's minerals that we use for electronics. There's rare earth minerals that we use for a lot of the technology that is in use today, from our cell phone to our laptops to solar panels to electric vehicles. We're using materials from the earth. So if you ever wonder, are rocks important? What is a rock? Well, the answer to those two questions, yes. Rocks are important. Rocks are aggregates of minerals. Minerals have a huge range of economic value, of specific uses, they're incorporated into our every single day lives in ways that we probably don't think about, but they're there. Harvesting these minerals from the earth through the process of mining can have very deleterious effects to the earth, which can then in turn affect humans who are living in the environments from which the mining has happened. So rare earth materials are important for all those things that I just said. In this case study of Bautu, Inner Mongolia, there was a lot of waste that was kept in large ponds, and that waste was killing crops and livestock and getting people sick, because what was coming up was radioactive waste, hazardous materials, and then all of the tailings from the mining to get all the rare earth materials out wasn't disposed of properly. So when we're thinking about how the land supports us and the minerals that we need from it, it's important to think about the practices for harvesting those mineral resources, the waste products associated with it, and then who is going to be the people who are experiencing the most amount of harm. Unfortunately, it's usually people who are the poorest, and so this is an issue of environmental justice. More money shouldn't mean that you deserve or that you get to experience breathing clean air, drinking clean water, and not exposing to harmful chemicals. That should be for everybody. Humans, human rights are such that access to natural resources and exposure to things that kill us should be minimized. And unfortunately, That's why environmental justice is a thing, because unfortunately, it's not equal. But policy can help bring that into equality, and then people like you and I who are thinking about these things and are supporting businesses and industries that aren't harming people with their waste products. This is one way that we can help. So what shapes the Earth's surface? Well, landscapes are made of landforms, and we call the surface of the Earth Earth's topography. And Earth's topography varies by location, by latitude, by precipitation patterns, the type of biome that it is. And they can be large, they can be small, they come in all different shapes and sizes, from the Himalaya mountains all the way to the Mississippi Delta. And the Mississippi Delta basically receives water from the Mississippi watershed. That's all the land that is going to drain to the single point at one time. Drainage basins come in all different shapes and sizes, from a little creek maybe that runs through your backyard or the foothills, all the way to something as big as the Mississippi, or even as big as the Amazon River, the largest river in the entire world. Water flows on land. We talked a lot about water. The upstream areas are known as hill slopes, and the downstream areas are known as floodplains, and the area where rivers meet oceans are called deltas. Generally, rock erodes on hill slopes. Erosion, sedimentation, lithification, so we're tying that back in. Rock erodes on hill slopes, and then it is transported through rivers in lowland floodplains, and then it deposits in deltas. And the smaller material makes its way out deep into the ocean. It settles down out of suspension, and then that is where sedimentary rock is created through the process of cementation and compaction. Here we see rivers coming into the Mississippi Delta, but we can also see tiny little lines here, and then huge swaths. So this river right here, during flooding, becomes massive. Rivers are really great at transporting water, at transporting sediment. They also do other fun things like nutrify the system, creating aquatic ecosystems for a variety of different species to survive. Rivers are great. They're an amazing feature. Land moves, sometimes slowly, sometimes quickly. Quick movement of land is going to be a landslide, and different human components affect landslides. Forestry practices can influence the occurrence of landslides. Rivers moving, glacial movement, wind, and even gravity can reshape landscapes. Glaciers can plow through, carving V-shaped river valleys into these nice, beautiful U-shaped valleys like we see in Yosemite. Yosemite was carved by glaciers. That's why the main Yosemite Valley is so wide, and then when you look at the different hanging valleys, they have these really great U-shapes to them. Indication of glacial carving over the land's surface. Sediment can erode, and sediment can deposit into a variety of landscape features. It erodes, like we talked about, out of hill slopes. It deposits in river deltas, and it creates massive, massive features. The depositing sediment can bring nutrients to its destination, wherever it is going. And so if we think about the salinity of the world's oceans, they rely on a few things. Water filters through divergent plate boundaries that keep it full of rare metals. And then different dissolved components from the Earth's rivers will actually make their way through sediment and be delivered to the oceans, renutrifying and helping to keep a stable salinity to Earth's oceans. Humans affect sediment in a lot of different ways. One way is by mining sand and gravel. That's a huge effect on sediment. Another way is by paving surfaces. And a surface that does not allow water to go through it is called an impervious surface. Water cannot pass through. And that means that increased runoff happens. When there's increased runoff, there's more power in that water. That means it has a greater ability to erode. And here we can see natural landscapes will slow the flow of water down. They will infiltrate. It will be uptaken by plants for evapotranspiration. In urban areas, you get much more runoff, and that has a greater capability of erosion when that runoff makes its way to the river because it's delivered much faster. Land use change affects the transport of sediments, and that in turn affects processes within the rock cycle from erosion to sedimentation and how the surface of the earth actually looks. This is important when thinking about erosion because it takes us to the idea of world soils. Soils are the uppermost layer, a very thin veneer on the very, very top layer of Earth's surface that is a mixture of weathered rock, mineral particles, organic debris, and soils are created by processes at Earth's surface, at the interaction of the geosphere and the biosphere, where rock meets life. And there is a complex interaction where different particles create the habitat to support different life, and it actually hosts a suite of life inside of it. That is incredible. There's different zones to soil, a variety of soil horizons, and we can classify soil based on the relative proportions of sand, silts, and clays. Here near the top we have infiltration of water. That water leaches down into deeper layers, and this is all going to be dependent on how much water is there, what is the parent material, and how much plant life is actually available, which ultimately might be controlled by what is the latitude, what is the biome, what is the precipitation, what is the temperature from which that area is that we're talking about. Soil profiles. So we've got different horizons or profiles. The very top layer is the organic layer. And then we have A, B, and C, which is usually topsoil, subsoil, and bedrock. Now, this is how soils develop globally, except there are differences in different soil types based on okay, we're missing one slide that I thought was next. There are different types of soils based on where it is in the world, based on climate. So climate is a big determining factor on the depth and the relative abundance of your different soil layers. Now, thinking about how are soils produced? Well, soils are produced by the breakdown of different sediments and the interaction of the different organisms that are living there with the rocks. They're also really dependent on worms recycling the material and the worm castings to develop very, very fertile, soft sediment that different plant species can actually live in. So worms are hugely important. They were a topic of interest for Charles Darwin. He's known for the theory of evolution, the idea of natural selection, but he also loved worms. And he was one of the first people to recognize that we need worms. In fact, worms are pivotal for soil development and soil generation. Here we can see healthy earthworms in the soil. They live in the upper levels, the A horizon. They pull material to the surface as they burrow. They digest and they mix the soil, and they leave their excrement, they leave their feces behind in what's called castings. And without worms, we wouldn't have healthy soils. So if you have a garden, maybe try and increase the amount of worms in there. You could order some worms online or go to your local nursery, see if they have a box of worms that you could put in there. And then you can help to improve the quality of your soil in your garden. Usually darker soils indicate more nutrients, healthier soil systems than do light colored shotos. Light are usually stripped of all their nutrients. The darker soils indicate healthier soils. And so we can look at many things. We can look at the texture of soils and the color of soils, the proportions of organic debris and leaf litter to understand how healthy a soil is actually going to be and how much life a soil may actually be able to support. Here we go. Soil classification. This is what I was thinking about. Desert, temperate, tropical. And although we have the same horizons, they're in different thicknesses and different quantities, and this is going to be controlled by latitude or by the amount of temperature and precipitation, which is going to indicate what biome that soil is going to live in. And there's this acronym CLORPT to think about soil diversity, where we're first thinking about climate, then about organisms, then topography, and finally, or not finally, then parent material, and then how much time. So a lot goes into the formation of soils. Soils support plants, and plants interact with a variety of other species. Soils grow food. That's probably the most important thing. Soils grow our food. So if we harm our soils, we're harming ourselves because we aren't able to grow food. And that's where all kinds of sustainable agricultural practices are making their way in right now, because the amount of soil degradation that has happened over the last 200 years since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, or within even the last 70 years since big, large-scale monoculture agriculture has taken over. We've got a growing population. We've got to feed the world. Everyone should have a right to eat food, access to healthy food full of nutrients. I think that's important. But in the meantime, as we've grown in population, we've grown in how much we've been developing, we've grown in technology, and we've grown in soil degradation too. Topsoil is absolutely important. The properties of the topsoil are called tilth. It's the water, the pore space, the nutrients, and the root space. And overuse or overwatering of soils can cause it to become salty. You can actually irrigate all the good stuff out of a soil and leaving behind only the salty parts. Topsoil takes a long time to develop, hundreds of years for an inch. It doesn't take that long to erode, especially when you till soil to prepare it for agriculture. It can have very harmful effects to soil. So there are now techniques, no-till agriculture, cover crops, crop rotation, various things that can help to preserve soil health and soil thickness. Here we can see this is all salt. Salt on a field. Plant growth is inhibited by salinization because of excessive watering that leached all of the important nutrients through the soil, leaving only the salts and killing everything in its process. So we can see plow-based agriculture destroys, it breaks up the soil, and it can be used, then when it's broken up, it can be carried away. Monocultures invite pests. Pests kill the monoculture. And so synthetic pesticides and herbicides have been used in conventional agriculture, and this can lead to soil degradation that damages the land. There has been a long history of agriculture and grazing, from plow-based farming to industrial scale, modern farming. And what we saw is that originally it was only sustainable in flat areas on floodplains, because if you till the side of a hill, then the side of a hill will erode and it will wash away, and then you can't grow any food there anymore. Again, we're getting back to how important it is to preserve our soils, thinking about how we're farming, where we're farming, the techniques, and what we're doing to the land surface. Agriculture isn't the only thing that shifts and changes the land surface. We talked about rare earth materials, mining for different mineral resources can have huge effects, causing big holes, big scars in the ground, wastewater, tailings, all kinds of byproducts that can have adverse effects to ecosystems and to the people who live there. There's this cool project, the Eden Project, the world's largest greenhouse, at an area that was heavily mined, and then subsequently the mine was closed, it was rehabilitated, it was changed in this area for educational opportunities. Wow, how great. We live in an age of restoration where we've done a lot of things. Our population has grown, we've met the demands of a growing population in various ways, and we're realizing some of the mistakes we've made along the way. Okay, cool. What do? We fix those mistakes, we rehabilitate the land, we restore the health of our world soil so that we can move forward in harmony, living sustainably with the different systems that we may have once affected. Deforesting is a huge, huge issue. Not only do you remove habitat, but you also increase erosion, and then that increased erosion can have significant effects to nearby rivers and streams. It's a cascade of effect. So how do we move forward knowing that the population is still growing and we want to live in houses? Well, sustainable forest management. It's saying, how do we do the things that we've been doing, but with the knowledge that we've gained, make better decisions that support ecosystems at the same time utilizing the resources that are necessary for humans to survive on this planet? It's possible. We're doing it. Urbanization removes habitat. Urbanization has effects to the landscape. It covers surfaces. Pavements do not let any water go through those impervious surfaces. But we can start to restore areas. We can put in greenscapes and waterfronts. We can add in areas of swales to slow the water down. There are holding ponds to promote recharge of groundwater into the water table. So thinking about how we can build sustainable communities, sustainable cities, is really important for reducing the amount of land degradation and ultimately supporting the health of our world soils. Because again, world soil health is absolutely necessary for continued human growth and for us to be able to feed our ever-growing, ever-thriving human population. So some things we can do, we know rare earth elements create a large impact through their extraction process. So recycling your electronics. Don't throw your electronics in the landfill. All that stuff can be reused. If you have any iPhone or Apple products, you can send them to Apple for free, and they will actually recycle them and reuse them. And it's awesome. And if you have any Apple products that still are of value, they'll pay you for it. Next to that, e-waste recycling. So put all of your electronic waste in a box, wait until there's an e-waste recycling event, or take it to the landfill specifically, and make sure that your electronics are being reused in a way. This is a huge one. This is really, really easy. Recycle your electronics properly. We can know how food affects soil health, and this is a big one. Every lecture we talk about what we're consuming, the food we're consuming. Think about buying local and organic. It costs more money when you pay for it, but the benefits are tremendous. Healthier soils, cleaner water, cleaner air, happier people. I think, this is my personal opinion, but organic food is the way of the future. I'm not really sure how we produce organic food for a population of 7.5 billion people, but I know that if you can think it, there's a way for it to be possible. So if I can think, yeah, why can't 7.5 billion people eat organic, nutrient-rich, local, delicious food? Why can't it happen? We just need to build the systems in through technology and policy. Know about development, city planning, reading about decisions. This is getting to the policy side. Become political. Vote. Huge one. Vote for people who share these values. Vote for people who care about the health of world soil, who care about the environment, who reflect your own values. So becoming very active. Really, it's becoming an active participant in the world which we live in. And with that, thank you very much. Thank you for your attention. I hope you learned a lot about land. I hope you have a great rest of your day or evening. I'll see you next time.